Welcome back to another day on Eos Island, y'all. Altron here. Today on the island, I'm bringing you a comprehensive Pokemon guide to Charizard for Season 6. In this somewhat beginner's guide, I'll be talking about the Pokemon's basic playstyle, abilities, items, and builds, as well as synergies with other Pokemon, and some basic tips against some of the other meta picks right now. Charizard is an all-rounder and more of an attack-oriented Pokemon capable of unloading massive amounts of consistent damage to entire teams of enemies through his basic attack and burn damage, and his game-changing ultimate. Charizard's strength lies in his ability to have an increased maximum damage range for his basic attack, and to use his enabling abilities to stick to targets and kill them relatively quickly. Charizard's truly at his best when kiting enemies around with his improved movement speed and slows, being able to move around the map to support and gank where needed as quickly as possible. Charizard prefers to be in the jungle, at least early on, that way he can race to level 9. But it's not totally helpless if you play him in the lane, as he can still manage to hit level 9 by the first objective, Regieleki. Charizard benefits from a moderately fast-charging ultimate that you can generally have available for most team fights. It's one of the best ultimates in the game, and it can easily flip an otherwise lost team fight or objective using just Charizard's ultimate alone. It is important to note that early game laning with Charmander can be quite difficult, especially if you're laning against aggressive opponents. Charmander's early game farm clear or lane clear is really bad compared to other Pokemon. There's not a lot of burst, and it's more consistent than anything else. So Charmander can get bullied out of lane pretty easily. You have to pick your fights when you can, and just remember that Charmander isn't that strong, and you really should focus on your lane farm and trying to farm your way up to at least level 5, to the point where you can contribute more to team fights as Charmeleon. But the laser focus should be on getting Charmeleon up to Charizard to level 9. Once you hit level 9, it's a pretty insane power spike, and you'll be helping team fights quite a lot more than if you were mostly trying to help team fights early and not focusing on your farm.
Charmander's first ability is called Flame Burst. Charmander attacks with a small ball of flame that explodes on the first enemy hit, dealing damage and burning enemies in a small radius. Charmander then gains a 20% movement speed bonus for 3 seconds after hitting an enemy. The burn lasts 4 seconds and reduces enemy attack by 5%.
Flame Burst is Charmander's main damage source to farm and enemy Pokemon. The bonus damage hits really hard if you're able to channel your basic attack uninterrupted. It's best not to use this ability as poke damage, instead focusing on using it on targets you plan on hitting with your basic attacks, as it's pretty lackluster in terms of base damage.
Charmander's second ability is called Fire Spin. Charmander shoots a burst of flame forward, exploding on the first enemy hit or after traveling a maximum distance. After exploding, this ability leaves a small patch of fire on the ground that deals damage every half second to enemies that stand inside, slowing their movement speed by 25% for 1 second.
Fire Spin is really not a great move on its own, but it does have its merits for poking enemies or throwing on an enemy farm to potentially steal while keeping yourself mostly safe. Generally speaking though, you want to throw down Fire Spin first, then immediately follow it up with Flame Burst and basic attack to burn your enemies' faces off. Doing it this way allows you to hit Flame Burst, which gives you a tiny movement speed increase, and allows you to melt people while they're still standing inside your Fire Spin trying to get out.
Charmander evolves into Charmeleon at level 5 and can now select one of the 2 upgraded abilities for Flame Burst, either Fire Punch or Flamethrower. Fire Punch causes Charizard to punch forward, damaging and shoving enemies hit with the ability. The first enemy hit is burned for 4 seconds, takes increased damage from Charizard's basic attacks, and has their attack reduced by 5%. At level 11, this ability can be upgraded into Fire Punch Plus, reducing the cooldown by 1/4 of a second every time Charizard damages an enemy with a basic attack.
Fire Punch can be an incredibly useful move if your team is lacking CC, or if you're more concerned with a single target, such as a speedster that needs to be burst down in a hurry. If If you plan on engaging in team fights though, your damage is going to suffer by picking this move up, as it only burns the first enemy hit, and it can be screwed over by having a wild Pokemon get in between you and the person you're actually trying to burn.
Flamethrower causes Charizard to breathe an intense blast of fire in a line in front of Charizard, damaging and burning all enemies hit, causing them to take increased damage from Charizard's basic attacks for 4 seconds and reducing their attack by 5%. If this ability hits any target, Charizard is granted a 40% movement speed bonus for 4 seconds. At level 11, this ability can be upgraded into Flamethrower Plus, increasing the damage dealt.
For the most part, Flamethrower is where the majority of your damage is coming from when playing Charizard. Not only does it burn all enemies you hit with it, but it also increases your movement speed by quite a lot and reduces the enemy's attack by 5%. This is really Charizard's bread and butter for engaging with enemies, chasing down enemies, or even just trying to escape. The bonus damage of this ability, ignoring defenses and shields, is actually huge, as it takes most people by surprise, especially Pokemon using Buddy Barrier to try and survive by popping an ultimate when their health is low.
At level 7, Charmeleon is able to upgrade Fire Spin into either Fire Blast or Flare Blitz. Flare Blitz causes Charizard to charge forward at a single target, creating a small shield, damaging, and throwing the target when hit. At level 13, this ability is upgraded into Flare Blitz Plus, and now applies a 40% slow on the target hit for 3 seconds after being thrown.
Flare Blitz is similar to Fire Punch in that it's really only intended for single target CCing, such as a Speedster or Hard Carry. It does deal a bit of damage to nearby enemies when you connect with your target, but it only throws and slows the initial target, so it's pretty underwhelming at the moment. What's worse is that it often just gets cancelled by somebody else's stun.
Fire Blast causes Charizard to shoot a blast of fire forward, exploding on the first enemy hit or after a set distance, dealing damage to enemies hit and leaving an area of fire on the ground for 5 seconds. The area of fire deals damage to enemies inside every half second and slowing their movement speed by 35% for 1 second. At level 13, this ability is upgraded into Fire Blast Plus, increasing the damage dealt.
Fire Blast is another really strong move that can be used for basic area denial or as a means of locking down a target that you intend to gank. Similar to Charmander in the early game, Charizard should engage with this ability and immediately follow it up with Flamethrower to chase down a slowed and burned enemy. 1 rotation is usually enough to kill most squishy Pokemon, but 2 rotations is enough to take down pretty much everyone else. Not to mention, if you nail a few players with this and they don't stun or KO you quickly, you'll win that team fight almost entirely on your own. The basic item setup for Charizard is the old tried and true Muscle Band, Scope Lens, and Buddy Barrier, using Flamethrower and Fire Blast as your abilities. Due to the decent scaling of Charizard's abilities, attack weight is decent as well if you plan on laning with Charizard, but if you're in the jungle, I would forego the attack weight and stick with the basic setup, as stacking attack weight is a little more of a headache when jungling. There are various other items that Charizard can use effectively, such as Focus Band if you're laning, or Energy Amplifier to make Charizard an actual murder machine when he uses his Unite ability. As far as emblems go, you're going to want 6 brown emblems and 4 white emblems to take advantage of Charizard's brawly playstyle. These emblems allow Charizard to stay in a team fight a little longer and take advantage of his decent scaling. For better reference, I've posted the emblems that I tend to use on Charizard on screen. You can really use anything as long as it's not nerfing your attack or HP too hard. I also would try to avoid nerfing your critical strike as well, as that is where some of Charizard's damage tends to come from. Some good synergies with Charizard are typically any support Pokemon that can help enable Charizard to stay in the fight longer, such as Blissey or Eldegoss. Typically, the longer Charizard stays in a fight, the worse the fight's going to go for the enemy team. But Charizard also does really well when a defender is present to help disrupt the enemy team as they try to focus you down. Think Pokemon such as Slowbro or Mamoswine that can either CC the target almost indefinitely, or Slowbro who can use Scald to kind of reduce the enemy Pokemon's attack damage, or even Surf to kind of hold them in place. Typically, laning with Pokemon that can help ensure Charmander gets to Charmeleon and then to Charizard by helping you confirm lane farm is huge when laning with Charizard. Pokemon such as Mr. Mime can help enable this, and even Pokemon who don't evolve, such as Duraludon or even Pikachu, can forego that early lane farm to help enable you to get to your stronger forms faster, while still maintaining a respectable damage themselves. The meta right now revolves around Mr. Mime, Glaceon, and Gengar. These three can be very problematic in their own ways, but all can be handled similarly with Charizard. Mr. Mime and Gengar both need to be able to hit their abilities to deal with you, but using Flamethrower to gain the speed advantage and basically just running circles around them makes them actually have to aim their abilities, rather than relying on the auto-targeting system. This is more than most Gengar players can typically handle, and especially those that run the Dream Eater or Shadow Ball Gengar, they'll have to manually aim their abilities, and that's not something that Gengar players can typically do. Good ones can, but most of the players just run the auto-targeting, so using Flamethrower to run circles around them is really the best way to handle Gengar. Similarly, Mr. Mime has to hit his Power Swap ability in order to even think about dealing with you, and so if you're running circles around him, it's going to make it really hard, as that thing's kind of slow and can be difficult to hit, especially with most Mr. Mime players being Chads, running around just throwing it using the auto attack feature. They're going to miss it, and so the best thing you can do against Mr. Mime as well is just use Flamethrower and run in a big circle around him, staying at maximum melee distance. Glaceon is very dangerous early on, but you can better focus her later in the game once you hit Charizard. Remember that Glaceon has a shield that prevents its CC from hitting her, which is her passive ability. This is visible as kind of an icy swirling mist around her when it's up, so if you try to ult her while the icy swirling mist is actually active, your ultimate will fail and you'll just end up sitting there looking really awkward at everyone while they obliterate you, pretty much. It's more important to engage Glaceon with Fire Blast first to clear that passive if she has it up. Then you can ult her. All in all, Charizard's a pretty strong pick for Season 6, and ultimately, kind of an underrated pick if I'm being completely honest. Most people won't pick Charizard because they think that Mr. Mime and Gengar are an easy way to deal with a Charizard, but it's honestly not entirely true. Especially on this new map where it's easier to get to Charizard from Charmander, and you really don't have to worry too much about farm because there's just so much of it. So on this new map, I do think that Charizard is a really great pick for Season 6, so if you need someone to climb with, he's not bad. Especially if you manage to be able to get him in the jungle, it's an even better play. So I hope this guide helps you improve with your Charizard gameplay. Like and subscribe for more guides like this in the future, and until next time, good fight and a good night.